Remember when I said that these philosophical insights came from a mysterious inner voice? Well, I want to assure you that was not exaggerating for effect. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm very skeptical. I know how easy it is to be fooled by my own mind. That said, I simply was not prepared for the odd and remarkably aligned discoveries that emerged. Here's one example. The poet we randomly chose to represent the director of the movie in your mind, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Well, we found out later in the writing process that he's the guy who coined the literary term suspension of disbelief, a term appropriated by Hollywood which refers to the willingness of people to suspend critical judgment in order to lose themselves in a story or piece of fiction. Strange, isn't it? Because that's exactly what's going on with you and the movie in your mind. Coleridge is directing you to put aside your disbelief, any kind of discernment or thoughtful assessment of life, and to accept the fictional story of you as your reality. And in order for you and those around you to maintain that delusional state, to feel assured and comfortable, your story must always remain coherent. A coherent narrative is a story that's simple and logical, one that adds up. It's not a story that's quote unquote true, and it's not a story that's necessarily inspiring or meaningful. Rather, it's simply a story that makes sense because your mind longs to make sense, to figure out what's going on in the world, ultimately, so that you can try to understand it and control it. Back in the 1940s, psychologists Fritz Heider and Marianne Simmel made a simple animated film with a couple of triangles and a circle roaming around on a screen and moving in and out of a rectangle. I mean, by today's standards, it's on par with the classic video game Pong. I mean, you can watch it online by searching for Heider-Simmel illusion. Anyway, they asked people to watch the video and describe what they saw happening. And overwhelmingly, what people saw was a simple, coherent story with various personalities, intentional movement, and goal-directed interactions, all from a bunch of meaningless shapes bouncing around a computer screen. People made dramatic sense out of a bunch of nonsense. Now, prior to the fragmentation of media and the internet acting as, a communication accelerant, if you will, the world was like that animated film. With only a handful of TV channels, a local newspaper, and a few radio stations, our social environments appeared fairly simple and coherent. We had shared storytelling experiences, and it was still relatively easy for us to look around at the personalities, movements, and interactions in our worlds and make dramatic sense of it. To figure out a simple story that made sense and that showed us the right way to be and the best way to live. Today, not so much. Authoritarian structures are being abandoned. Individual opinions and lifestyles are multiplying. I mean, we wake up every day to the chaotic reality of a hyper-connected world where more and more people are freed from rules and social controls. I mean, to the storytelling mind, it's one dangerous and confusing mess of morphing shapes spinning haphazardly across the screen. I mean, think of it for a minute like gossip. We don't really care about the subject of gossip. What we care about is what that information means to us. You see, we integrate gossip into our self-story to contrive a sense of control over our surroundings, to correct errors of judgment, make new predictions, and feel secure about our future. Now, imagine that the gossip in your organization or your social group has metastasized out of control. One person says one thing, another says the opposite, someone says something that's incomprehensible, and so on. All premises seem up for grabs. How the hell are you supposed to make any predictions? I mean, what's the theory? What's the strategy? What's the story? Again, your mind desires the easiest, simplest, most comforting and direct path to an answer, to a story. Economists and cognitive scientists have analyzed this propensity to death. And I mean, I could fill this program with the science to support everything I'm telling you, but you don't need it. You see, all you really need to know is this. Unlike a computer, your mind looks for what makes the most sense based on its personal goals and on what it has seen before. It's forever seeking recognizable patterns in creating coherent cause and effect stories because that is how your mind creates meaning and makes predictions. In the movie Up in the Air, the protagonist, played by George Clooney, he makes his living flying around the United States and conducting company layoffs on behalf of his clients, the employers. In one scene, he's grooming a young, ambitious new hire, showing her the ropes of airport check-in. As they walk towards security, he points out the various types of people in line and the reasons not to get in line behind them. Asians, parents with children in strollers, elderly people, and finally, Middle Easterners. Exasperated, his young protege exclaims, "That's racist." And Clooney's character responds matter-of-factly, "I'm like my mother. I stereotype. It's faster." But here's the problem. It's getting harder to stereotype. Simple, unambiguous patterns are increasingly difficult to recognize in today's chaotic environment. It's like a blue sky with fluffy white clouds. But instead of cloud animals slowly taking shape in your mind, the blustery wind keeps shattering those images. And that's what's making it more and more difficult to make sense of worldly experiences and to craft a coherent narrative. Now, as a result, this is causing many people to feel anxious, confused, depressed. Why? Because the framework, the collective story, the common patterns that have allowed us to confidently shape the imagined stories of our lives and of our organizations, and then live those forward-moving stories on autopilot, have become increasingly unstable and uncertain. And that causes stress. I mean, have you ever noticed that it doesn't seem to matter how many times you've seen the same obligatory scenes in conventions in a TV show or a movie? Or even that you can predict how the storyline will eventually play out. You keep watching because it's familiar and comforting, right? That's why screenwriters typically follow traditional story writing convention to make the audience comfortable, to lull them into a suspension of disbelief. I mean, in fact, the industry is overflowing with manuals, classes, and consultants to help you do just that. I know because I've used all of them. Because if we, as screenwriters, deviate from tradition, from the underlying structural pattern of stories, which again mirror the intricate expression of the workings of people's minds, the audience will not like our stories. If you want an example, go watch Gigli, or Gigli, however the hell you pronounce it, rated one of the worst movies of all time, yet starring celebrated actors like Ben Affleck, Al Pacino, and Christopher Walken. You see, anytime someone violates the automatic workings of your mind, Coleridge comes to life and directs you to make sense of what you're experiencing so you can comfortably relax back into your hypnotic movie. I mean, that's why audiences demand narrative coherence. Otherwise, the cognitive lights will come on and ruin the illusion. It's like when someone tells you how a magic trick is done. Think about it. I mean, let's say you grab some popcorn, you turn down the lights, and you kick back to watch a movie. And you begin to ease into an engaging story. When suddenly, what the hell was that? What just happened? Something confusing or contradictory happens on screen and you're snapped out of your immersive state, your suspension of disbelief. I mean, we've all experienced the frustration this causes. Your uncomfortable mind is screaming, I don't understand what's going on. Someone, please tell me what's happening so I can get back into the flow of the show. And if you're unable to reconcile this in your mind, you will turn it off or tune it out. It's an innate fight or flight response. Do you understand the depths of the fight or flight instinct? You see, when your mind feels threatened, and that feeling can come from a growling dog or from something that clashes with the story in your mind, especially the made-up movie called You, your mind instinctively responds with fight, argue against it, flight, get the hell away from it, or if your mind senses no hope at all, freeze, mentally tune it out and deaden your experience. Prior to experience narrative incoherence, right, during your movie viewing experience, you were comfortably on autopilot, munching your popcorn, happily believing that the actors were not really actors, that they didn't really know what they were going to say next or what was going to happen to them in the story. But then you became confused and experienced mental discomfort. Now try to imagine in real life the psychological discomfort you'd experience when things in your worldly performance become incoherent and unpredictable. You're immersed in your personal movie, happily on autopilot, believing that everything makes sense and everyone knows what they're doing, and then all of a sudden, bang, something unexpected happens. Something that doesn't square with your story. And you temporarily awaken from your dream state, typically disoriented and on edge. Well, welcome to the new millennium. You see, your safe and seemingly impenetrable belief systems and cultural constructs are all under attack. You don't know who or what to believe, and this is shaking the foundation of your personal narrative. And it's keeping you anxious and awake. You casually glance at your phone and are randomly exposed to all manner of ideas and arguments, rants and threats. You're unable to shield yourself from the repeated tremors of vastly different and shifting perspectives in the world. You see, in the past, we were able to live with a somewhat stable perspective of the world. I mean, the skies were calm. We all saw things pretty much the same way. But the doors on our safe havens of perception and belief have been blown wide open, and many people, especially those hooked to their phones, are swimming in a sea of bias, trying to negotiate conflicting opinions about everything and everyone. And as a result, they're beginning to question the truth and stability of their own stories. Now, you may be thinking, well, perhaps that's a good thing. I mean, after all, we could use more diversity of thought and experiences. And you'd be right. However, that does not change the reality that people's brains are wired for simple stories that make sense. Narrative coherence. And if they're not able to transcend their present reality and manage the growing confusion and mental discomfort, the contradictory patterns that threaten their identities, they will react as they struggle to maintain psychological and social stability. Do you see the catch-22 here? Your story-making mind craves a simple story, a coherent narrative, and so it will search one out. You may find it by narrowing your perspective and adopting dogmatic beliefs, which, when faced with a conflicting story, will trigger anger and intolerance, a fight response. In fact, the media has discovered that by reinforcing your personal narrative with tailored content and biased news feeds, and by stirring up your emotions with fear and controversy, you'll engage more. You'll watch, read, and click their stories, which is good for their business. Or you may find it by eliminating the drama and conflicting information altogether, right? By moving off the grid, mentally or socially, which is an extreme flight response. Or you may simply freeze in your existing narrative and cope by disengaging with the world, like most people do today. You relieve your mental tension with substances, gambling, food, television, addictive technologies. I mean, pick your poison, it doesn't matter. Regardless of what choice you make, you'll be closing your eyes to the magnificence of existence, to the amazing, complex, and dynamic interconnection of all people and things, the strange and beautiful dance called life. And it's a paradox because the solution to your mind's dilemma is denied by its inherent wiring. Do you see? By its conditioned desire for narrative coherence, for a simple story that makes sense. It's like one of those Chinese finger traps. You can't escape because you want to escape. The only way out is to not want out, but rather to let go. To let go of your desire for an ideal identity and a comforting, coherent narrative, and then manage the inevitable tension that comes with that free-flowing, counterintuitive approach. Remember, despite what Coleridge wants you to believe, you are not a character in a story defined by an imaginary past. And this simple truth is what every great human being in history has eventually discovered. I'll be covering this paradoxical idea in great detail in future sessions, and if you embrace it, I guarantee you, it will completely change your life and the lives of those around you.